Michael Akers here from Ask Akers Nutrition. Welcome back to my channel. I finally have for you my $20 Dollar Tree grocery haul video. I know it's been a while and I appreciate your patience. For those of you who checked out my Where Have I Been video that I posted a little while ago, you know that I moved and life got a little crazy. I'm in my new kitchen now. I've taken down some walls, we're changing the layout, there's still a lot to go in here. Of course, this video was shot back at my old place when Dollar Tree was still just $1. I know that the groceries would be a little more expensive now, but I think you're going to be surprised at how much food we are able to make with just 20 ingredients. Of course, as a dietitian, nutrition is important to me. And one of the other goals of this video was to see how healthy I could make these meals. So at the end of the video, I review the nutritional content of the meals. I think you're going to be surprised. So let's jump into it. Okay, let's start by taking a look at my grocery haul. Again, this was 1 year ago, so everything was $1. I got a dozen medium eggs, 12-pack of flour tortillas, a bag of Mexican blend shreds, a 1-pound bag of dried Great Northern white beans. I got canned mushrooms, canned pumpkin, tomatoes, okra, and corn in a can, apple pie filling in a can. I got a quart of almond milk, a 1-pound bag of oats. I got 1 quart of chicken stock, a 5-pack of Top Ramen beef flavor, a 4-pack of sausage patties, an 8-pack of hot dogs, 1 can of apricot halves, about a pound of potato gnocchi, 2 pounds of long grain rice, and a can of diced tomatoes with green chilies in them. As you can see, that's a lot of ingredients. I had a pretty lofty goal of making some tasty dishes, and so here's what I was going for. Somewhere between a gumbo and a jambalaya with rice and beans, so I called it the Gumbo-lya. Ramen with eggs and dogs, a sausage risotto with cauliflower and beans, gnocchi in a pumpkin sauce, quesadillas, baked oatmeal with apples, Italian rice cake, a torta di riso, which I've never made but I was pretty excited about it, and then a pantry egg bake, which I will explain as we go. Got started on a cold day last October. Overnight I had to start the bag of beans. I didn't add any salt or flavorings because the beans are going in a lot of dishes and I wasn't sure that I wanted any flavors to compete. Going to start by putting the entire quart of chicken stock onto the stove. When you make risotto, you have to have hot stock. You add it a little bit at a time and it has to be basically boiling. For some future dishes, I'm going to need some finished rice, so I'm going to get 2 cups of water boiling. I wanted to see how much rice is in the bag. According to the bag, there are 5 cups. According to this measure, there are 4. So I'm going to put about 1 cup into 2 cups of hot water and get that going. I also want to hard boil about half of the eggs for the ramen dish. Of course, this happens a lot of times. Even though I checked the eggs at the store, one of the eggs was bad and I had to toss it. When you're dealing with just such few ingredients, every ingredient matters, but I think we'll be fine with 5. We're going to get the risotto started. A little bit of oil over the heat. I thought I was very lucky to find these 2 frozen bags of vegetables. One is a pepper blend, which has a lot of peppers and onions in it. It's a great foundation to almost every dish that I cook, and the other one's a California blend. I'm going to use this little bit of sausage to give some flavor to the risotto, just a bit of protein. Obviously going to bring a lot of salt and spices inherent to sausage. I'm going to cut up some of the peppers and onions. I'd put aside about 1/4 cup for this dish and chop that really nice. Again, as you know, I'm a fan of adding color to everything. That always brings out more flavor if you can caramelize it just a little bit. So I'm going to get that going and sweating that out. My eggs are going, rice is cooked, my stock is starting to boil. I want to turn my attention to these mushrooms. As is the case with all canned goods, they contain a lot of liquid. And the question is whether or not we can use that liquid for any extra flavor.
It's salty, but it's full of mushroom flavor.
I'm going to be pinching off a little bit of just about every ingredient. So I'm going to start by pinching off a little bit of the mushrooms. This is going to go into my pinch bowl. I've put on the cutting board somewhere around 1/2 cup to 3/4 cup. I'm going to reserve about this much of the mushrooms for another dish, basically divided it. A lot of people don't like mushrooms, and people who like mushrooms don't generally like canned mushrooms. And I want to get that frying. I want to get some of the sogginess out of the mushrooms. Obviously, canned liquids contain a lot of sodium, so adding it to the dish can be an unnecessary source of salt. Into this, you will not see me add 2 cups of rice. I'm sorry, I don't know what happened to the camera, but we did add 2 cups of rice. Meanwhile, we want to get a nice bowl set aside, and you will not see me put the eggs in there because, again, not sure what happened to the footage, but a few shots are missing. Back into this pot filled with water, I want to boil the gnocchi. They're basically cooked. So we'll set on to the process of cooking risotto. Risotto is usually made with arborio rice, But I did my research on the internet and I did find that you can use regular rice to make risotto. The process of making risotto is pretty much adding stock slowly and stirring, and then stirring some more. We don't have quite enough stock for all of this rice, so I have to heat up some water in addition that we'll be adding slowly between water and stock. My rice is ready, so I'm going to set that off to the side because I'll need to get this pan going with another dish. You have to let the risotto simmer in between stock additions, between stirring and simmering till the rice absorbs the liquid. Gnocchi is basically a mashed potato and flour sort of pasta. It starts floating as it gets finished cooking. Here I'm adding hot water to the risotto. Requires a lot of stirring to break down the starches to set free the creamy texture that defines risotto. These are done probably a little soon in the process, a little sooner than I realized, maybe sooner than I wanted. So I'm going to set those aside. Some people don't like gnocchi. I actually think it's very delicious personally. It's very filling and it's sort of a blank canvas. You can add just about any kind of sauce to it. It'll take on the flavor of just about anything. Getting vegetables at Dollar Tree, of course, is really difficult. I was excited to find a couple of frozen bags of vegetables. And I had just planned to just mince up vegetable bases and put them across the dishes. But then as I was making this dish, I realized sausage and cauliflower is sort of a classic combination. And so I picked out the cauliflower from this California blend and decided to add those just separately. Here you can see we're adding more water, making sure we give it a lot of stirring. I was pretty happy with the texture and the flavor combination was working out really well between the sausage, the mushroom stock, and the box of stock to the rice. I chop up and add my cauliflower.
Looking very yummy. I'm so hungry.
Of course, rice and beans mixed together is a complete protein, so I want to put in 2 cups of the finished beans in here. I'm just going to set that aside to rest, and I need to get a couple of other things going. And of course, I have to play musical chairs with the pots on the stove to find out how I want to get this all laid out. So once I got that all organized, instead I think I'll just bring in yet another pan and confuse everything. I want to start my Gumbo-lya. The reason I call it a Gumbo-lya is because it's not really a gumbo or a jambalaya. Gumbos are thickened with something called a roux, which is taking a starch and sauteing it in fat till it is rendered out a nice flavorful thickener, and that is what I'm going to be doing here. So I don't have flour, but I do have oats. As you know, I like to blend up oats into everything, and this experiment was to see if we could turn oats into sort of an oat flour. I put it in the food processor for quite a bit, and because oats are more or less a whole grain, there's a certain part of the shell that doesn't actually break down completely into a flour, but I thought overall it did break down pretty well. So I have about a 1/4 cup of oat flour there. We'll get that roux going in 1 second while the pan heats up. I need to make the rice for the Italian rice cake. I'm checking out again the canned liquid from the apricot halves to see if it's sweetened or tastes like apricots. I'm not really sure what it's canned in. Taste it, it actually has some very delicious sweet apricot flavor, so we'll be using free sweetener. Also, I'm going to need something akin to milk or cream. I figure we're going to use almond milk. Almost tasted like nothing really.
Oh, that's like completely neutral.
Together between the 2 liquids, we need 2 cups for the 1 cup of rice, and we're going to get that going on the stove. Meanwhile, it's time to start our roux. The flour goes into the fat. Roux are very slow and low. You want to cook the flour flavor out of it. You want to get some good color on that. Basically, you want to get the roux as dark as you can stand waiting for it. You can see here it sizzles away on the flour, and in a little while it's slowly going to change color and get a lot of flavor in it. So we'll just let that go, sizzle on the side for a minute while we get back to our apricot rice. Strange thing happened. We got some sort of foam. I don't know what it was from. I don't know if it was a preservative in the almond milk or some sort of preservative in the apricot juice, but it didn't look like something I wanted to eat, so I removed it. 1 cup of rice goes into this mix of apricot juice and almond milk, and we're going to set that off to simmer. Meanwhile, this is what the roux looks like as it's going. Let that simmer, and now I'm going to need yet another spot. More merry-go-round on the stove. It's time to get the pumpkin sauce for the gnocchi underway. It's also difficult to find any quantity of meat at Dollar Tree. I was pretty excited to find these turkey franks because, first of all, they're turkey and they actually contain a lot less fat than a normal hot dog. And I thought that we could use them in several different ways. And I figured their flavor profile is probably fairly neutral. As you can start to see, it's just getting a change of color going on. Check the rice to see for its doneness. Slowly simmering away in the background. I decided it needs just a little more liquid, so I'm like, heck, let's just rinse the apricots and pour some more apricot sweetness in there. Of course, you know my favorite technique. Everything needs to get browned. A little color makes everything taste good. You can really see in this shot that the oat flour is changing color. A classic combination with pumpkin sauce is sage, so I am going to reach into my cabinet and use some sage. If you have some Italian seasoning or anything else along this line, rosemary or even basil, I'm sure any of the floral Italian-based seasonings would work well here. You can skip it if you don't have it. I happen to have it, so I am adding it. My base of onion and peppers is pretty much going into everything. I was pretty excited to find a can of not pumpkin pie. Pumpkin is just a super health food. It has a lot of fiber, a lot of vitamins. It's very good for you. And I'm pretty excited to add it to this menu. I thought, well, let's go for a little creaminess. We'll add a little bit of almond milk and some water to thin this down. In retrospect, I think maybe this could have been a little bit of stock. The hot dogs didn't quite bring as much to the game as I was hoping. Here you can see this is starting to really get dark. That is in a very good place. The longer you wait, the darker it'll get, and that is totally fine. I'm going with the rest of my dogs into my Gumbo-lya. I definitely want to hit up a lot of peppers and onions in my Gumbo-lya. That's definitely an important part of the flavor compound of something like that. So that's going in with the dogs and the thickener. Salt and pepper for everybody. A little more sage for this guy. As you can see, this was done a little bit early, so it looks like brains, but it came apart pretty easily. It wasn't completely stuck together. A little bit of finesse and it came apart. Overall, I'm pretty happy with that dish where it's at right now. Frozen vegetables, very wet. You can see the thickener is already hard at work. Then I want to add this can of tomato okras and corn. Okra, of course, a fun and key ingredient in gumbo. Checking out the liquid. As I start to squeeze the liquid off, I almost crush everything and realize most of the can is just mostly liquid.
The whole thing is just liquid.
I taste test it. It's oddly sweet. I expected more of a tomato base.
Weird.
But it's good tasting broth, so that's going in. Here's the rest of my tomatoes. I'd like to add more tomatoes. I want to see what we're getting out of this can. It's very, very spicy.
Ooh, spicy.
So we're going to use a little bit of that to bring a little bit of heat to the dish. A little bit of balance, the sweet vegetables. And again, you can see the thickener is hard at work. Tell me that does not look delicious. Going to add 2 cups of water because I'm about to add some rice. And it is my last cup of rice. It worked out perfect. So that is going on to simmer. Very, very happy with the flavor profile that's going on in there. I'm going to throw 2 scoops of beans in there. Beans and rice are a complete protein along with those hot dogs. So hopefully our protein count at the end shows that we're holding up pretty well in protein department. I've let this just sort of reheat slowly. We're going to let that set for a bit and set up and simmer our rice off. I have some stock left over, so I want to use it, so I'm going to add an extra cup into there because I don't want it to be too dry. Again, it's somewhere between a gumbo and a jambalaya. Okay, while everything simmers away, I need to take a pause out and check my game plan.
6 cups of water.
So we're right on schedule to start the oats. We're going to use the rest of my almond milk. You might remember from my first video that my Oat Bake wasn't exactly all that I wanted it to be, so I was excited to have another go at it. This time I have almond milk, which I thought would bring a little more creaminess to the game, give it a little more depth. So we're going to get these oats soaking, adding plenty of water. In the end, I added 10 cups of liquid to the 5 cups of oats, and I wanted to let that get going and soak while I continue to prepare the other dishes. Meanwhile, back in my Gumbo-lya, the rice is starting to absorb the liquid. Give that a quick stir. Things are looking pretty good in there. Gnocchi is done. It's time to move on to yet another dish. My last pan that I have. I want to start the ramen dish. I'm going to start with the packages of ramen as a base and add some of the other ingredients that I've managed to collect. One of those ingredients is, of course, these eggs. It's kind of traditional to have half a hard-boiled egg in a bowl of ramen. If you have other seasonings in your pantry, soy sauce or maybe even teriyaki sauce or oyster sauce, some sort of other Asian flavorings, you could possibly marinate these eggs. But for the sake of this video, I'm just going with plain boiled eggs. So I'm going to bring the 10 cups of water to a boil that it calls for, and I'm going to check in on my game plan.
Pinches of shrooms. Oh, and I do need milk.
I'm going to pinch off a bit of the spicy tomatoes and chilies, and the rest of these mushrooms are destined for the ramen. I figured that mushrooms and ramen is a pretty good combination. Watching myself dump these in here, I am thinking, why didn't I cut those up? I would recommend giving those a quick chop. I'm going to check to see how the rice is doing, make sure it's absorbing all the liquid. I decided to add about half of my remaining stock. Not too scientific, I know. So my idea for the ramen bowl is to kind of imitate maybe Spam or something similar to Spam. So I attempted to cut these hot dogs into some sort of slivers as though I had chopped up Spam. They are round, so that was a limited success. Checking on the oats, they are starting to soak up the liquid. I want to add some vegetables to everything because, heck, I'm a dietitian. I'm going to do my one pinch off to my pinch bowl for my future dish. Now I was preparing to chop up the vegetables for the ramen dish when I realized that having had the bag sit on the counters, the vegetables have pretty much thawed and there's a lot of water in the bags. So I decided to salvage all that delicious vegetable stock and add it to the ramen dish. Since I filled it with water, I figured it couldn't hurt to add this vegetable juice to the dish. Pinching off my peppers. Checking to see how this guy's going. Tell me that doesn't look yummy. I decided to buck up the protein by adding 2 cups of beans to this dish. I'll tell you right now, in hindsight, I'm not sure that that was necessary or a good idea. I know that seems a little strange, and even seeing it now, I'm not sure why I did that. They don't take very long to boil. Another choice you have to make is how many of these seasoning packets go in. I can tell you right now, I do not recommend 5 seasoning packet. There's a tremendous amount of sodium in each ramen dish, almost an entire day's worth just in one package if you're on a sodium restriction. Considering that I made it with water, I thought that 3 seasoning packets was quite generous. Given the other ingredients that I put in with the ramen, that also helped flavor the stock. While that simmers, I'm going to start the Oat Bake, my second attempt at this crazy dish. I'm going with something akin to a baked oatmeal. It can be kind of a traditional breakfast. It's basically eggs, milk, and oats. So I tried to replicate that here with a bit of the almond milk that I put in. My idea was to go with this can of apple pie filling because we get some actual apples, and that'd be a free and easy way to get some seasoning into the entire dish.
Yummy.
Again, I'm going to reach into my pantry. I had this pumpkin pie spice hanging around since 1 or 2 holidays, and I thought this was a good use for it. Again, if you don't have these seasonings, you can just skip them. Most people have cinnamon on hand. That would definitely be a good addition here. Allspice, cardamom, Chinese spice powder, any sort of pie spices. Like most canned products, there's a couple of extra ingredients in my apples. Modified fruit starch and high fructose corn syrup. The cornstarch is a thickener, and I thought that this might actually be helpful in this dish because, of course, I want this to set up and I didn't have a lot of eggs to do the job. So I was hoping actually that the cornstarch might contribute to this dish. I'm opting to add a little fat to the dish because I don't have butter or cream, and I break up all the apples and into the oven it goes. Now it's time to assemble the Italian rice cake. I was pretty excited when I found this recipe because there's a lot of rice and a lot of eggs to this dish, and I was trying to do something, somewhat original. So this torta di riso, pardon my Italian, seemed like a fun dish to make. You start by having to separate egg whites from the egg yolk, which I did with moderately poor to fair success. The egg yolk goes into the rice. If you'll recall, this has the apricot juice in it and almond milk. Then all of the apricot halves will go in all nicely arranged, face side down, and then onto whipping the egg whites. Not in a glass that's fragile with a fork, as I started to do, but into a bowl where I whipped and whipped and whipped and whipped some more. I forgot one of the fundamental key trainings of food science, and that is you need to whip room temperature eggs. I did not do that, so I was whipping and whipping and whipping, and of course there's a point when this is not going to become lofty peaks. So unfortunately, I had to just take it to the point that I had it, but if you do it right, that should be lofty peaks that you're folding in nice stiff egg whites. I think by design, an Italian rice cake is meant to be made as a way to use up some of the ingredients you might find in a traditional Italian kitchen. I was pretty proud of the way it looks, considering that we're making it with a few of the ingredients that we have on hand. On to checking my oat bake. This is nowhere near anything. It's totally soupy. You can see the edges are starting to set. Italian rice cake is going in next to that. I opt to just add the rest of the stock to the risotto, which is now sat and soaked up a tremendous amount of liquid. Next, I'm going to start assembling my quesadillas. I'm doing the quesadillas last because they're sort of a catch-all dish. Whatever I have left will make a tasty quesadilla. Here we're just dividing the remaining beans between all the tortillas, and I did regret putting the beans in the ramen, as I definitely would have preferred to have more beans in the quesadillas. But the effect still worked really well. Gonna just peek in on how the baking is going here. Those things baked a long time. All right, so I'm going to just share the beans among all the quesadillas. Everybody's getting an even mix. And I'm going to chop up what I have left of the spicy tomatoes and the onions and peppers. I feel like this is a very legitimate ingredient in quesadillas. As I looked in that bowl, I wanted to snatch some of those ingredients and really fill up my quesadillas, but I have a game plan. I usually like to stick to it as much as possible. And of course, rice, beans, cheese, tortillas. These are some fully loaded quesadillas. Get it onto a hot skillet. Give it a good smush down so it sticks together. These are just sort of a low and slow for me, unless I want to set fire to them. Just get them all capped off, squish together real good. We're going to take a peek at this. Both of these guys are starting to set up. Of course, being the scientific baker I am, who needs 325 when you can do 324? Check in on this guy, give him a good push down with my big spatula, and voila, nice and browned on that side, getting heated through, hoping to melt the cheese, warm up the beans. Now I can turn my attention to my last dish, which is the pantry egg bake, as I'll call it. I have about this much cheese left. I would say that's somewhere between 1/4 and 1/2 cup, and my pinch bowl, and this much rice left over, and a decent amount of almond milk, almost a cup, really, and a few eggs.
We have 3 eggs.
So first I thought these would be great for muffins. I got my muffin tin out, started smashing some eggs, probably getting to the end of a long day of baking. My idea was that these would be a cute breakfast muffin of some kind, you know, with a little rice on the bottom, a little egg souffle, cheesy business. But as I mixed that up, it ended up being quite a lot, as you can see. And I was not confident that it was going to fit in 6 little egg muffins, so I decided instead to make 1 large square souffle. I was like, we can cut that into squares as we can into muffin rounds. Looking back, I'm not sure that I would really need this egg bake. I think all of these ingredients could have went into other dishes just fine. I'm going to keep these guys running in the background. Time to put the egg bake in the oven, and of course I forgot that I already have everything else in the oven. So I figure while I'm rearranging the oven, let me just check in on these bakes and see where they're at. That guy is not ready. The Italian rice cake, on the other hand, was firming up very nicely. I thought I'd just put the pantry egg bake to the back. That wasn't quite ready yet, so that goes back in there for a little while longer, but the color is starting to look amazing. Consistency was looking amazing. How to keep running quesadillas, that's amazing. This is how much ramen this made. You can't hardly tell, but this is a huge bowl. There comes my quesadillas, getting to the end of those. The oat bake is setting up. It's a little bit squiggly, but the oat bake looks cooked through to me. It's time to check on the Italian rice cake. I put my knife in, and that looks pretty good to me. So we'll just let the little pantry egg bake settle in. Flip our last quesadilla, and it's time to get these dishes served up. Mr. Snickers is ready for dishes to be served up. He's like, bring them on. We've got our pumpkin gnocchi and a sage sauce. This is the Gumbo-lya with dogs and beans. These are our quesadillas coming off. We've made risotto with sausage, cauliflower, and beans. And this is the final beautiful omelette souffle pantry egg bake. Here are all of the dishes, all of the food for $20 at the time. It made an incredible amount of food.
Now, of course, how did we do on flavor? Let's go to my final verdict for each of the dishes.
First up, the Gumbo-lya. For a budget dish, it was really deep on flavor. It was very filling. It was very satisfying. One thing I might do different is add a little more of the spicy tomatoes just to give it a little more kick. But if you have hot sauce or something like that, it's easy enough to do after you make it. But overall, this dish was really delicious. The other rice dish is the Risotto. This came out very good. This dish was surprisingly complex in flavors. The white beans and the sausage do go together. The cauliflower was a good addition. Plenty of seasoning with everything that went in there. One little cooking adjustment I might make is to cut the cauliflower into a smaller dice, not try to cut the cauliflower when it's so frozen. As you saw, I kind of struggled with that. The creamy rice also really worked out. I'm sure someone who's an expert in arborio rice risotto could tell the difference. But for a weeknight risotto, I was very impressed with the outcome. Definitely recommend. Next up is the gnocchi and the pumpkin sauce. It ranked sort of at the bottom of my favoriteness of all the dishes that I made. The pumpkin was just a stark pumpkin flavor. Overall, I think it was a good foundation, but I would go to the internet and check out a few more pumpkin gnocchi recipes to get some more inspiration of bringing out a little more flavor, because I know I've had this in a restaurant several times and it can be extremely delicious. Okay, let's talk about the ramen bowl. This recipe made a ton of ramen, and let me tell you, none of it went to waste. This whole thing got eaten. This was a really good blend of vegetables. The hot dogs helped, the eggs helped. One small adjustment I might try is cutting the hot dogs when they're a little more frozen into long, thin strips and maybe frying them so they got a little saltier, something a little kin to turkey bacon. But overall, this dish was a big hit and was very good. Who doesn't love quesadillas? These quesadillas were very delicious. You can see they were pretty hearty. If I had to do it again, I would probably skip the egg bake and contribute a lot more vegetables to this because it kind of was bean forward. If you have taco seasoning or cumin paprika, a little more flavor to give the beans a little more depth, that would certainly be handy. But overall, I think that these are a crowd pleaser. They did have some good flavor, and especially for kids or handheld to go food, I highly recommend them. And now what I would say is the least successful recipe of this experiment, this oat bake. It was kind of bland. The oat milk did not lend a lot of creaminess. It was a lot of oats. One can of apples was not enough. If you could get a couple of extra cans of apples or a bag of mixed fruit, I just think it needed more ingredients. It definitely needed more seasoning. That was not enough cinnamon. I'm sure I'll get another chance to go back to the drawing board on the oats. The egg bake was very good and it was nice to have eggs in the morning, but I think I would just contribute those ingredients to other dishes. Contribute those eggs maybe to this recipe and some of them to the quesadillas to make breakfast quesadillas. I would just reimagine these two particular dishes a little more into the rest of the recipes. And I would say this torta de riso was my funnest recipe in this challenge. I've never had a torta de riso and it really was amazing. The ingredients were completely legit. We didn't skimp in any way and it tasted amazing. It had good apricot flavor, sweetness, creaminess. I would say the only issue really was the fact that we had several large rice dishes. So rice dessert after a hearty rice meal, maybe not the best compliment, but let me tell you, if you have extra rice, this rice cake is something I would definitely recommend considering if you have these ingredients on hand.
As you can see, we made a lot of different dishes with these ingredients. There was a lot of variety, different flavors, even though a lot of the ingredients were shared between the dishes. Of course, the big question is, how healthy are these dishes?
Since there's no real way to break down exactly what was in any one dish or what any one serving of any one dish would entail, what I decided to do was total up the nutritional value of all 20 ingredients. Get a weekly number and then divide it by 7 days, and we could gauge those values by the recommended daily allowance. I also added approximately 1 cup of canola oil across the week and a generous 1 cup of maple syrup. So this just gives you a ballpark range. Each of us is different, and probably the number one difference is, of course, how many calories any one of us need in one day. I went ahead and used 2,000. The RDA, of course, the daily value on the back of a package, that might be a lot, and a lot of people are watching that won't be enough. It really depends who you are and your activity level. A couple of these ingredients did not have complete nutrition information, so I went online and as best as I could, I found a ballpark range of very similar products and entered those numbers. So we take a look across the bottom. The green lights are where these dishes did a really good job. The yellow lights are where it kind of comes in with a word of caution, and then the red lights are where this week's nutrition didn't meet the mark. I'll just quickly point out the green lights. First of all, as I mentioned, the RDA is 2,000 calories, and believe it or not, every day would be an average of 2,300 calories. If you have a 1,600 calorie diet, you'd have an extra 700 calories every day across 5 days. You might actually get 9 days worth of food out of this. I'm not surprised personally. This was a lot of food. The both of us ate on this for several days and there was still food left over. Another green light, of course, my favorite friend, fiber. Because of the ingredients that I picked out, I'm happy to say that we totally met the fiber goal, as in 164% of the daily fiber range. Let's take a look at who hit the fiber chart. Of course, the quick oats, the beans, and of course, pumpkin. White rice does not have as much fiber as you think. Tortilla certainly had some fiber in it. Every little bit matters, and it does add up. Taking a look over at iron, we hit about 100% of the iron. Men need less iron on average. I really expected that a budget grocery haul would be lean on the protein, but we did a really good job. Some people like 20%, some people like 10%. So I set it around 15% of the day's calories, which came to 75 grams. We average 68 grams on any one day. Our higher protein items, believe it or not, oats are high in protein. Ramen is weirdly high in protein. The tortillas had protein in them. Whole grains generally contain protein. Eggs obviously brought the business. White beans, very good for you, high in protein and fiber. Cheese had protein, again, long grain rice and turkey franks, bringing the protein game. We'll take a quick look at the yellow lights. I broke down the calories to lean more towards a moderate carb diet. So we have 30% of our calories from fat. We do need fats for our bodies to operate properly. But as you can see, that would be equivalent to 67 grams. And we only hit 53 grams. And that was with a cup of oil for the week. So we came in at only 80% of fats. So I would say some of these dishes could be a little bit more generous with the addition of oil or butter. As we came up short in the fats, we came in over my 55% carbs. So I would say this was more probably closer to a 25% fat, 60% carb. And of course, my last yellow light was calcium, 67%. That was a number that I'd like to have seen be higher than that. I did have fortified almond milk, which helped a lot. Everything else has a little bit of calcium, adds up. So we're about 2/3 of our calcium for the week. And now the red lights. A quick peek over at some of the nutrients that don't get a whole lot of attention. Vitamin C, vitamin A, thiamine, folic acid, all in the 70s to 80s. I thought that was a perfectly fine range. The body does not go into immediate deficit if it doesn't have nutrients every day, is able to regulate itself. So these are great targets to be out for 1 week. We did come up low in niacin. We also came up low in potassium. They recently redid the nutrition labels and they took vitamin C off and put potassium on. And this week shows you why there's a concern that people often don't get enough potassium. If you check out some of the higher potassium items like the white beans and my canned pumpkin and the tomatoes, corn, and okra, you can see that it's just not enough for other dishes that are really low. The RDA for potassium is quite high. It's 4,700 milligrams. High potassium foods are oranges, tomatoes, potatoes, believe it or not, and bananas, obviously. A lot of fresh fruit and vegetables that it's tough to get here. Also, vitamin D, that is a really tough one to get in general. And of course, the last red light, the most obvious red light, the not surprising at all red light, is sodium. Processed foods contain a lot of sodium. If you look down this column, we start with turkey franks. The total sodium was 3,400 milligrams. Cheese blend, almost 2,000. Gnocchi, 2,500. Going down the jar of mushrooms, the canned tomatoes, the tortillas. Almost every single item that I purchase contains an excessive amount of sodium because it's a processed food. Evaluating all of the dishes, I will say that of course they taste very well seasoning. I added salt to nothing. There was plenty of salt and seasoning in all the rest of the ingredients. I think we could have done without this chicken broth and saved ourselves 3,500 milligrams. That would certainly bring this down. Also, the only red box that I have in all the ingredients is next to the ramen. Each package was 1,330 milligrams. I put in 3 of them. If you can nix this to 2, which I think was plenty flavorful, you'd also save another 1,330. As I made these dishes, we're at 155%, 3,500 milligrams a day when RDA is around 2,300. This is how sodium sneaks into our diet. This is how come we end up with health problems. I would definitely kill one of the ramen sodium packets and I would definitely nix the chicken broth. Not necessary. Save the dollar or of course buy another bag of vegetables. One little blue light on there, that is the total sugars. Taking a look at where my added sugars are coming from, they're literally coming from added sugar. Like I said, I added a sweetener line because I do believe some of these dishes had to be sweetened. We were at 111%. Maybe around 56 grams out of a 50-gram day. I find 111% to be a very good place to be. I put it in a blue light because I was impressed with adding sweetener and a cup of sweetener over the whole week that we were still around just 100% of the added sugars. But overall, I thought that for the taste of the dishes and the ingredients, that this was a pretty successful experiment.
Overall, I would give this challenge a good to very good nutritional score, especially since we were using a lot of prepackaged and prepared foods. Just by swapping out some of these prepackaged ingredients with some fresh foods, you can make this an excellent score for the week. All right, that's it for this week. If you like this video and want to see more like it, please click the subscribe and like button down below so you can be notified when I post my next video. I've already got some good ideas going and I promise this time it won't be so long before you see me again. If you have ideas for videos, please post them in the comment section below and definitely let me know your thoughts on this video. I'm Michael Akers. Until next time.